Hi, Tig.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So appreciate it. So, I know we chatted about this already, but I sort of felt like you probably wouldn't remember the first time that we met outside the bathroom at the Time 100 event back in New York City, and we chatted for quite a while, and that stuck out to me. I knew, of course, everything that you'd been doing and talking about to destigmatize conversations about facing illness. But what struck me at the time was just how passionate you were with a total stranger about this. Like, that was incredible. And so I want to back things up a little bit. I bet everyone in the audience knows exactly who you are, but for folks who may not know all about your journey, tell us about that first performance. And I think it was just days after your breast cancer diagnosis.
Tell you about the actual performance or what had gone down in my life?
Tell us all of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I had come back from a massive tour. I thought I had a cold, but I had a sinus infection, then pneumonia. Then I took antibiotics for the symptoms, and then that caused me to develop C. diff, which is an intestinal disease that just ate my insides up. It's very deadly. And when I got out of the hospital, a nearly 2-week stay, a few days later, my mother tripped and hit her head and died. And then my girlfriend and I split up. And then I was diagnosed with invasive breast cancer. This was all in 4 months, by the way. It was quite a run, to say the least. And then a few days after my diagnosis, I got on stage and talked about it, because I think that seeing how quickly life and health can just slide away, I wanted to perform again, because I really do love doing stand-up, and so.
Yeah, it was amazing. Tell us a little bit more about what made you decide to share something so personal, so scary, and so fresh for you, and then what was the audience's reaction to all of that?
Well, my comedy had not ever been that personal before, and because I wanted to perform again, and I knew I was about to disappear into doctor's appointments and treatment, I just thought, I want to perform. Especially, I didn't know how my health was going to go. I had cancer, I had C. diff, I was so ill, and so I just thought, I want to perform again. And then when I thought about performing, I thought, well, I can't just talk about observational topics while I'm holding onto my belt loop so my pants don't fall off. I was so sick. And I just thought, well, I'm going to just see if I can make anything about my life or experience humorous. And it was really a leap, because my fear, but also was a little funny in a dark way, that if I did bomb and I died, that people would be like, did you see her last show? I mean, I give her credit for the attempt, but just didn't nail it.
Well, you didn't bomb.
I didn't bomb. It ended up becoming the #1 album of the year in comedy. Yeah. So, didn't win the Grammy, but still, that's fine.
So in your Netflix documentary, which is wonderful, by the way, if you have not seen it, you talk about the fear of dying. And since this is End Well, we're just like getting right into that.
Sure. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. How has this fear evolved or shifted throughout your journey with cancer and with grief? And have you found any unexpected sources of comfort or humor in confronting that fear?
My fear was so heightened, and I can't even, it feels weird to talk about it in past tense because I've certainly had scares, I've had, things show up and removed and challenges over the past decade. But I did have a conversation with my therapist recently because I felt a little frustrated. My story was so public with my stand-up and the Netflix documentary and my book and everything, all of the different iterations that it came out. And I was realizing, people, which of course they should, that think, it's just a perfect, happy story. You got through it and everything's fine. But the reality is there's still health challenges. There's still those fearful moments. And I'm still heightened. I still have those heightened moments. So it's not like it's so far in the past and I got through that. But I did have a conversation with my therapist a few months ago talking about the frustration I feel sometimes. And I don't even know specifically what she said other than to not go into every doctor's appointment, if I can, to try and get into some sort of headspace that's a little more neutral rather than going in just, what is this? What are you going to find? What does this mean? And she just, as much as you can to clear your head and make space for the possibility of you're not terminally ill. This isn't anything to worry about or any of that, and
That idea of like staying present, which is in the moment, which
it's
is so hard to do.
It's so hard because I'm going in with like, I have this lump appeared an inch away from my mastectomy scar. How do I'm just chill about that. Yeah, what is that? Yeah, it's probably nothing, right? And it was nothing. It was nothing.
Yeah.
It was removed, but it was nothing.
Yeah.
But it was something, it was nothing.
So in your documentary, you mentioned sitting at your mother's bedside as she was dying. And how did that experience shape your understanding of care at the end of life and the importance of open conversations about it, which is a lot of what we're doing here today?
Yeah, my brother and my stepfather, I remember at the time being so hurt because they both went home after she was taken off life support, and there's no world I was going to walk out the door, and I was still very sick, but I know now that so many people deal with things so differently, and that's why these conversations are so important, because my brother and my stepfather, they didn't have the ability, and it has nothing to do with whether or not they loved my mother or cared about her. And I think it was actually when my cousin died of cancer a few years ago that it really, and I do remember meeting you, and I told you specifics. I remember meeting you. I remember talking to you, and honestly, this is a weird thought that I'll just share with you. While we were talking, I had this thought went through my head where I was like, is this the last person I'm going to see when I'm dying? Like when you were talking to me about end of life care, I was like, and you gave me your card, I was like,
oh my God.
Whoa. I'm telling you, I remember the conversation because I did think.
I freaked you out.
No, I truly thought, whoa, I wonder if I'm going to give her a call and she's going to be at my deathbed. But anyway, woo!
This is the kind of audience we have.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, they were like, they're very interactive. Yeah, be at her deathbed. But it was when my cousin was dying. It was, of course, my mother's death, meeting you. And then when I was with my cousin, nobody in my family was talking about the fact that she was dying. Everybody was still keeping that positivity going. They're like, you're going to beat this. You're going to get through. You're going to. And I was sitting there. This is a person that was like ripping the lines out of her arms, like, am I dying? Like wanting to get off. Her legs were like baby giraffes. Like she could not stand. And I remember holding her and thinking, I don't feel like this is even my place to say, because her husband wasn't saying it and her children weren't saying it, even though everybody knew she was dying. Yeah. And I, in that moment, felt like beyond, and my mother was in a coma when she was dying, so it wasn't like she knew she was dying, but with my cousin, she knew it, but nobody was saying it. And I was like, ugh. That was when I realized more than ever the importance of the open dialogue.
Yeah.
And I talk to people all the time about that, about losing my cousin in that way. And now I feel like I'm playing into, do I remember you? But the conversation I had with you, it really was, it was major. And I think that's why you got that energy out of me, because I was in the middle of it all, you know, losing my mother. And then I met you in the middle and between all of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you also talked about the impact of your mom's death on your decision about having children. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Well, I'd always wanted children. Even before I knew I was gay, I would always just imagine myself, I pictured myself with a bicycle and a basket and a child in the basket. It's not too far off from that, but no, I'm married with 2 children now, but I didn't ever think, how am I going to get that kid in that basket? And I never pictured a man. I didn't picture anything. I was just like, I gotta get a baby in that basket. And then yeah, it was just me and that kid who was named Little Timmy. Not the name of either of my children, but it was me and Little Timmy. And then when my mother died, I immediately had this feeling of, I don't want kids. I don't want kids anymore. I wanted to be able to share my child or my children with my mother. And then my very close childhood friend came over right after my mother died, and I shared that with her, and she just said, you cannot think that way. This is before I met my wife, but my friend Shannon said, no matter how your child comes to be, you will always be able to see and feel your mother through the connection with that child. So you must continue in that direction of having a child. And I'm so grateful for that conversation, and then meeting Stephanie, and then now we have the little, children in the baskets and stuff, but they're almost 8, so it's been a while, but yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk a little more about comedy, and that often relies on shared experiences. So how have your experiences with grief and with illness influenced your comedy? You've talked about this, but do you find that it resonates differently with audiences who've gone through similar sorts of challenges?
It definitely resonates with people that have gone through it, and I think, the album that I did in 2012, it talks about loss of love, loss of my mother, my health, there's so many things, just cancer, there's so many things that people connect with in that set, even if they haven't gone through it themselves. You know, you have a mother, you have your health, or you have somebody you love. And so I had to learn in time, that's why people are connecting with it, because it was a little confusing why people are connecting with this show. But I also had a really interesting experience when I also, after I had a double mastectomy, the comedian in me kept hearing a voice in my head, you should do a show topless. You should do a show topless. And I was like, I can't do a show topless. And it kept popping up to where I was distracted every time I was performing. I was like, I should take my shirt off. And I was like, I can't take my shirt off, because at that point, it was 6 months later, and I just thought, it'll seem like I'm trying to milk something, so to speak, like way beyond the fact. And then I thought, well, no, this is relevant even way down the road. And then I did a show, and in the middle of the show, I took my shirt off and didn't acknowledge it. Thank you. And I thought, that's what's funny about it, is to talk about airplane travel, which is what is the least respected comedy topic within comedian conversations. And I thought, that'll be great. I'll do hacky material with my shirt off and reveal my mastectomy scars and won't acknowledge it. And that way I could make a statement, but make it funny, hopefully. And when I went off stage, the comedian, I'm sure you know Bo Burnham, he was backstage, and he was like, put all female body issues aside, cancer aside. He said, this is the human body. He was like, I'm not a woman. I don't have cancer. This is inspiring just as a person, that this is your body, and you're just out there with your shirt off doing comedy. And I was like, it felt incredible in that way, because I didn't even consider. I only thought of women or cancer survivors. And here's this man saying, it's inspiring just as a man, and to be comfortable with your body. And I think that's that point that I had gotten to was, I was uncomfortable for a while after my surgery. And then I realized, my scars just represent that my body healed. So that is what made me want to do that show topless. So.
We share that. I also had a double mastectomy for cancer prevention, and what you say about the scars, that really that's really meaningful to me. Thank you.
Glad.
I want to come back to something you said earlier in the context of your therapist, and that's the question of, how do you deal with the very normal waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, fearing recurrence or something's gone wrong? You go to therapy. What else do you do, or what sort of guidance could you share with folks who maybe are facing that themselves?
Well, the sweat that I wake up in the middle of the night in these days is menopause. But I do have that fear. I try so desperately to not let it really get into my day-to-day, because I know that I know that there are things I can do to try and prevent, and I do those things. And I changed and I know people have very different views on this, but I personally found that changing my diet to a plant-based diet was very helpful. It makes me feel really good. crowd goes mild. But, you know, for me, I did notice a massive difference in pain and all my levels shifted. And so I do that. I also exercise every day. Whether I take a walk, I'll tread water for an hour. It's very meditative, and it keeps, you know, a lot of pressure off of just my entire body, and I just float and tread and think or not think, and I try to sleep, but again, menopause, and I really am always trying to find that balance of like the work and personal life, and with touring, I'll get a huge chunk out of the way, and then it's like I'm off for 4 months, except for podcasting. But yeah, I think that's what I do, and that's what I stay focused on. Also, positive people and all of that. It's so crucial. It's so crucial.
Yeah, the stuff we can control. Yeah,
the stuff that I can control. Man, do I control it.
So I love comedy because it seems like it's often the first place that people push against society's blind spots and prejudices. And not always, of course, there's certainly comedians who exploit prejudice, but that's for another day. What freedom does comedy give you versus other avenues of expression? You do other things too.
Well, I mean, comedy is, you know, that it's very one-sided, you know, and you get to go up on, I mean, obviously there's interactive moments where people will speak to you, and sometimes that's all right. But yeah, it's you really go up on stage with your rehearsed or thought out ideas, even if you're coming up into it on stage in the moment and you didn't even plan it. It's clearly something that was bouncing around in the back of your mind, and you are there talking to people and sharing your thoughts, and you go away. And in other situations, you know, whether it's podcasting or something like that, there's more of an exchange. And as I continue talking, I'm forgetting what you asked me.
All right, well, let's just move on. Let's go back to meeting outside the public bathroom.
Okay.
You know, so you and I did chat for a good 15, 20 minutes. We talked about all sorts of stuff. Do you find that being so public with your story, with cancer and with loss, that people come up to you and tell you what's going on with them and just share, you know, TMI, and what's that like?
It does happen. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's hard because I am just a person wandering around the world, and sometimes I'm having a rough day, or yeah. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But I used to stand outside my shows and talk to everybody after every show, and because I was feeling so thankful for the response I got, and I'm glad I did that. But then I had a moment where I really realized, oh, I have put out a TV show and a book and all these different things that people can reference, and I can have some boundaries about things, and I can say, oh, now's not a good time, and if people get upset with me, I just have to live with that.
Yeah, you gotta take care of yourself.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And it can be draining when people come and share their stories and they want to relate to you. I hear that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's completely fine and great, and other times I'm caught in a very weird moment.
Yeah. Final question. Tell us about a time when one of your jokes about cancer was too dark to be funny.
Well, in my documentary that you saw, there is a joke where I talk about how because before I was diagnosed with cancer, and when I had breasts, they were very small. And it was so crazy to me when I went in after my surgery and the surgeons were like, you know, we'll take this from back here and suck this out, cut this and and I was like, I barely had anything to begin with. And it felt so wild to go with anything other than scars. But I used to make jokes all the time about how small my chest was all the time in my stand-up. And then after my diagnosis and surgery, I made a joke about how my boobs overheard me all those years. And then finally decided to kill me. And that joke didn't go really well in the beginning.
Seems like it went pretty well.
Well, I thank you, but I know how to deliver it, and it was written a little differently before, and so in the documentary you see the joke evolve and throughout the movie, and but yeah, that whether it's cancer or any joke, it's always awkward when something flops, but especially about cancer. And that was my big fear before I did that album. I didn't even mean for it to be an album, but that show that I did, I really was like, how do I get into this? So, but it becomes just part of being a comedian. It's like you have those moments where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. And then 2 days later, something worse happens. In life or on stage, and it's like, on we go, so.
On we go. Tig, thank you so much.
Thanks for
My
having
goodness.
me.
We're so grateful.
Thank you.